The Labour Party presidential candidate in the 2023 election, Peter Obi, said that governance structure in Nigeria produces poverty. Nigeria is rich in land, people, oil, and natural gas, and other resources needed to bring out hard development. In spite of these abundant resources, majority of the people are still wallowing in abject poverty. The problem of governance readily comes to mind as Nigeria needs not to remain at the present level of underdevelopment at this stage of her national life. Therefore, lack of good governance has continued to be a missing link in Nigeria's development efforts. Nigeria has all it takes to guarantee a bright future. It's more of if more of its wealth are channeled to the development of the people and to the productivity use of the land and other resources. And to have the conversation on governance structure and poverty in Nigeria, our guest standing by on Zoom, Comrade Anselem Eragbe, who is a former National Youth Leader, Labour Party. Good evening, Comrade.
Thank you. Good evening, Signature Television. Comrade Anselem Eragbe, the immediate past National Youth Leader of Labour Party in Nigeria and a member of the NCC, which is the National Caretaker Committee of the Labour Party. It's my pleasure to
Okay,
be here.
welcome to the show. We are glad to have you join us. Just as the what was read earlier, P2B had said that governance structure is the root cause of poverty in Nigeria. What is your take on this particular thought of his?
Well, first and foremost, let me recount the cliche of Mr. Peter Obi. He had insisted that we need to move from a consumption to production. Now, basically, this is his cliche, and that is the road or the route Nigeria needs to take, ideally. Nigeria is a country blessed with over 250 million people and with a land size of over 723,000 square kilometers of land, arable land covering over 70 to 80% of that land size. So what that presupposes, we are a country that's extremely blessed by God, endowed with all manners of natural resources, minerals endowment. There are about 108 elements on the periodic table. Nigeria has most of these elements in large quantities, in commercial quantities. So, but what we have found is a situation where we have deliberately refused to take advantage of our natural endowments. We have rather waited for PTAPs. Corruption has been the order of the day. The governance structures, like Mr. Peter Obi said, has been the bane of our national development. Now, talking about governance challenges or issues, corruption is a major factor in Nigeria. Nigeria is perceived as a highly corrupt country, ranking 149 out of 180 countries with respect to the 2020 Transparency International Corruption Perception Index. And that scored Nigeria 25 over 100. So basically, governance structure is a key issue. We have what's called the ineffective leadership structure in Nigeria also. We are in a country where leadership has failed to a very large extent to address the systemic risk we are faced with. Issues like terrorism, issues like the herders farmers conflicts in Nigeria, issues like the police and security brutality in Nigeria. All of these factors have exacerbated poverty and insecurity because ideally there is little or nothing you can do in a situation of conflict. So look at the most part of the country today. The insecurity has spanned from the northeast to the northwest to the north central down to the southeast, southwest, virtually pervaded the entire country. Only recently you saw the happenings in Benue State with over 200 people killed over the night. So how do you intend to grow? So these are issues that have to do with governance challenges. Again, we have the issue of the weak institutional structures. Nigeria institutions are virtually plagued by poor governance and management issues. All of these issues hinder poverty reduction efforts. So we must consciously, as a people, do things in such a way that we can address some of these challenges. So I bother to highlight this point to let you know that yes, governance issues or structures are the bane of our national development in Nigeria. And I bother to highlight issues of corruption, ineffective leadership, and weak institutions. So I thank you. God bless you.
Okay, so how exactly does the role of fiscal responsibility play? What role does it play in helping to, reduce the rate of poverty in Nigeria? I'm referring to the fiscal responsibility.
Well, fiscal responsibility basically have to do with fiscal policy. Fiscal policies refer to the use of government spending and taxation to influence the overall level of economic activity. So basically, this is the role of fiscal policy, where government expenditure becomes very relevant in the scope of things. Now, it is ideally used by government to achieve economic objectives, such as promoting economic growth, reducing poverty, and stabilizing the economy. So this is what that does. When government spends a lot of money, of course, it has its pros and cons. But there are key components of a fiscal policy regimes. First, I'll talk about government spending. For instance, the government can increase or decrease its spending on goods and services, on infrastructure, on social programs to stimulate or slow down the economy. So this is one way fiscal policy is being used by the government to regulate economic progress, or otherwise its retardation in the country by its own spending, government expenditure. Now, we have the aspect of taxation. Now, the government can adjust tax rates and taxes based on so many factors. And all of these factors have influence on the amount of disposable income available to households and businesses, which can affect consumption and investment decision. For instance, in every family, it is the amount of money available to the family that will determine the kind of meal or the standard of their living. Basically, you cannot go beyond the amount of money available. So that way, should government policies make enough funds available to the citizens, now the standard of living, of course, will be high. So, of course, we have what called the high standard of living or improved standard of living. Otherwise, it will be very low standard of living where the goods and services available to the citizens are very marginal. So some of the objectives of a fiscal policy in any regime, in any country, would be one for economic growth. So fiscal policy can be used to stimulate economic growth by increasing government spending or cutting taxes, which can boost aggregate demand. Of course, the forces of demand and supply have everything to do with how stable or viable an economy can be, and the people. For instance, inflation is an issue. Inflation is a high, sustained, and persistent increase in the general price of goods and services. A situation whereby so much money chased after very few goods. So that's the situation Nigeria found itself, a country of about 250 million people, where the disposable goods and services are so marginal, such that even the available resources will have to chase after these small goods. So you have all of this. The so-called the inequilibrium or the disbalance in economics of trade. Nigeria is virtually importing so much and exporting very little. So this imbalance in the trade also causes this high inflation. So all these are government policies, productivity, and otherwise another issue. Nigeria is virtually a consuming nation, as it were, today. We virtually consume all manner of imported goods and virtually produce little or nothing. Price stability. Fiscal policy can help control inflation by reducing government spending or increasing taxes, so which can reduce aggregate demand. So these two factors, taxes, availability of goods, services render, the number of persons that are engaged in productive activities are all matters that have to do with fiscal policy. Now, there's the component of poverty reduction. Fiscal policy can be used to reduce poverty by increasing the amount of goods and social services that are available. government infrastructural development that benefit low and low medium income earners or households. So these are some of the factors that have to do with fiscal policy as to how they affect the overall well-being of the people and the economy of a nation. So what that to suppose ideally is to say, should Nigeria wishes to get it right going forward, the government must make a very conscious effort to determine the disposable income available to the citizenry. For instance, the minimum wage in Nigeria is about 70,000 naira. And you agree with me that 70,000 naira can neither take you home nor bring you out, ideally, when you consider the prices of goods and services in Nigeria today relatively.
Even the 70, comrade, even the 70,000 naira, is it being paid? Because it's obvious that the government had, instructed that this become the normal minimum wage. Is it even being paid to every civil servant out there?
Now, normally there's ideally what is supposed to be called a living wage. And a living wage ideally is supposed to be an aggregate of the expected expenditure pattern of the lowest income earning person to give him an average standard of living in a country. Now, you and I know that the 70,000 naira will not take you anywhere considering the prices of goods and services. But the bigger issue here is that so many Nigerians are not being paid even this 70,000 minimum wage. The federal government itself is lacking in this respect, let alone the state government, who are not even able to pay, notwithstanding that subsidies have been removed and they earn so much monies, but these monies do not get to be used effectively. So these are part of the issues we are suffering from as a people in this country. So in all of this, the types of fiscal policy that we began to talk about, we have what called the expansionary fiscal policy. Under this arrangement, you have an increase in government spending or a cut in taxes to stimulate economic growth. So if whatever we are doing does not directly impact on economic growth, then we are doing nothing. We have the contractionary fiscal policy, which is a decrease in government spending or an increase in taxes to slow down the economy and the control of inflation. So these policies, even though they are not academic in the Nigeria context, we really need to begin to apply them in such a way that first and foremost, we emphasize on productivity. For instance, I said earlier in my introduction that Nigeria is a country blessed with over 923,000 square kilometers of land, for which 70–80% of that land is arable, and these lands are lying fallow. The lands are not cultivated in plants, in animal boundary and processes. So we are not adding value to our natural endowment, and there is so much hunger in the land. So we have insecurity. We have insecurity both in terms of security issues and food crisis. The average Nigerian does not even eat a balanced diet. Of course, a balanced diet is that which contains the essential minerals and elements in a food per time for intake. Nigerians are virtually eating so much gari. Of course, gari has become even so expensive. So we eat so much of carbohydrate and very less of protein, minerals, and some other essential nutrients that are necessary for the normal body growth and development. So these are issues. So we must deliberately sit back as a people and work out how best we can move this nation forward. So I totally agree with His Excellency Peter Obi.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Let's look at another angle to this. I'm talking about corruption, because it's obvious that corruption is an underlying issue when it comes to the governance structure in Nigeria. If we don't, bring down, sort of mitigate the level at which corruption is in the country, we would not move further as a nation. So how well does this corruption affect the poverty rates in Nigeria?
Yeah, basically, over 40% of Nigerians, they live below the national poverty line, with many lacking access to basic infrastructure like electricity, like safe drinking water, like improved sanitation, like improved healthcare, and so many other economic indices and parameters with which you can judge the standard of living of a people. Now, corruption is endemic to the extent that the monies meant for some of these things I have listed are being looted by government officials. How do they do this? They do this by direct over invoicing. Remember, I'm a civil servant. I had to have issues with my management at the time in my own agency because I saw that what they did at that time was to over invoice for projects that were not executed. Members of the National Assembly came to oversight and to approve such over invoicing. So I'm saying this authoritatively that this is the crisis we have in Nigeria. Even the budget will have been enough if it were judiciously implemented in aspects in which provisions were made in the budget for implementation. So this is a corruption issue. Now, we have the other aspect as the job does not translate. See, jobs don't translate to poverty exit. So most of the workers are engaged in small-scale business household activities like farm, non-farm enterprises, kiosks, all of these issues, with only about 17% of Nigerians wage jobs that can lift up people out of poverty. Now, take a statistics of Nigeria, where even in the civil service that has the highest level of employed Nigerians, you don't have more than 2 to 3% of Nigerians employed in that sector. So what that means is the budget that is made in Nigeria is not spent for more than let's say about 2, 3, 4% of the people. So what do you do with the 70, 97, 98% of the mass of the people running over 230 to 40 million people who don't have a means of livelihood, who are not sure of where their next meal will come from? But in this same situation, we have people driving in jeeps, where people have 100, 200 houses in Abuja. These houses are under lock and keys. So many people are sleeping under bridges. So many people cannot afford house rent. So many families cannot train their children. You have a man and wife and children. Probably this man is earning 70,000, his wife is not working, and the children are schooling. A situation where a child's school fees runs as much as hundreds of thousands of naira. For instance, I have 3 children. Per term, I pay over 1 million naira for my 3 children. Now you ask, if I were earning 70,000 naira as a typical Nigerian, how do I pay for any of these children? So that means Nigerians are in a situation where even the quality of education is not more guaranteed. I had free basic education in Nigeria, free and compulsory education in Lagos State during the Jakonde era, which translated up to 1991 in Lagos State. So my parents never had to pay a dime for me in healthcare, in education, and some of these aspects. The education at that level was qualitative, free, but now you pay through your nose and you don't even know what you are paying for. Most children are at home in Nigeria. Parents cannot afford school fee. Accommodations are issued. The accommodation rate in Nigeria, are over the roof. If you live in Abuja and you don't have your house, you have to pay millions of naira. You are a civil servant that earns 70,000 naira, you are paying millions, hundreds of thousands of millions for your house rent. You have children to be trained in the schools, healthcare, you have dependents. So these are issues. So consciously, we must deliberately, and this is where it all comes to play, politics in Nigeria. People like us are bothered to remain in the political stage because we think and feel that the only way to get it right is to have effective political leadership. So that brings us to the solutions of the governance structures. So until we put in place effective solution, the first one will be macroeconomic reforms. By macroeconomic reforms, it means we have to implement fiscal, trade, and exchange rate policy reforms that can help foster pro-poor growth. I mentioned that earlier. 2, we have to talk about productivity boost. Now, policies to boost farm and non-farm household enterprises can improve productivity and create jobs. I talked about farming, mechanization ideally, because of the large arable land and body of mineral deposits in commercial quantity we have that are not being exploited. So the bane, like I have identified, is corruption tied to governance structure. So I brought out to show us how governance structure impacts all of these crises. part of the solution will be to improve access to basic service or services, such that under this arrangement, you enhance access to electricity. For instance, the tariff on electricity recently is over the roof, where probably you spend, say, 5,000 naira to buy about 15 units of watt of electricity. I mean, it's not sustainable. So these are issues. Water, for instance, sanitation, for instance, all of these factors contribute to poverty reduction.
Comrade, do I have your attention? Okay, so let's look at some policy implementation. What are some key policy implementations that have actually been put in place to mitigate the level of poverty in Nigeria, and how has this actually been put into proper effect? Let's look at the National Social Investment Program, NSIP, that was introduced in 2016. So these programs are being put out there in order to help mitigate the poverty situation in Nigeria. But how well is it being managed? Is it still sustainable till now?
You see, basically, I need to be frank with you and Nigerians to say most of the policies are just academics. Implementation is zero to a very large extent. For instance, let's take the National Housing Fund Scheme. For instance, it's a social policy. It's a social policy trust of the government that presupposes that housing be made affordable. Similarly, we have the National Health Insurance Scheme. So similarly, these are social policy schemes ideally set up to enhance the social status and economic well-being and welfare of Nigerians. But like I said, the implementation of these policies are zero. For instance, you don't get to find social housing in Nigeria anymore, because the social housing policy stipulated that should the off-taker be able to afford, say, 5% to 30% equity of a particular house type. For instance, for a civil servant, the highest limit for a house type should be 15 million, and the lowest could be from hundreds of thousands. So for a one-bedroom, the law says pay between hundreds of thousands to 5 million. Now, 10% of 5 million is 500,000 naira. Now, should a worker, of course, a worker may be able to afford 500,000 naira through many means, either through loan and the rest. Now, when you give such monies to the developer by law is supposed to get a mortgage refinancing at 6%. That's the primary mortgage institution. The developer will approach a primary mortgage institution who will liaise with the Federal Mortgage Bank to access funds from the Federal Mortgage Bank, because civil servants are contributors. Every month, 2.5% of their salaries are being deducted into a pool. So it is this pool expectedly from where the PMIs should access funds to make available to the developer to build this housing to be delivered to the beneficiaries. Now, I'm telling you all of this to say, as a civil servant, these are good policies, but none of these things is working today. People like us will have to go out of our way to seek foreign funding. I said on a live program like this, I sourced with my company through the research sector 150 billion euro funding for the housing intervention for Nigeria workers nationwide. We brought in 14.2 million euro in 2021, and Zenith Bank conspired against us. As I'm talking on this phone tonight, I'll be going to court tomorrow against EFCC and the Zenith Bank concerning funds that were issued for Nigeria workers housing projects in 2021 that were held down. And the Zenith Bank denied receiving these funds after receiving the funds. So there are so many Nigerians that are facing some of these issues. So these are corruption issues as to why government policies do not work. So I'm telling the world, I've put myself in perspective clearly. I can give you more scenarios concerning why things are not working. So nothing is working. Nothing is working. So all of the policy you read are like, I'm a deputy director today in the Nigeria Research Institute sector in Nigeria. So the man you are talking with is a man who is grounded in government policies. I can tell you the issues from my fingertips without missing words. So, but we can do better than this. The only way we're going for this is that that's what we call there's a policy that has to do with what's the name, the proper name now for that policy. It is called I'll look for it now. The contractionary fiscal policy. Now, under this policy, it's a decrease in government spending or an increase in taxes to show how expenditure pattern of a nation goes through. Now, we must have people who have capacity, people who are well trained, devoid of corruption, administration, such that whatever the law says, whatever is being approved, being implemented. So we have a situation people do not implement government policies. People are now more interested in what comes into their pocket. So unless the EFCC was set up to check these excesses, but how far they have achieved that is another matter that has to be carefully addressed. So, my dear, if you bear with me, I've just said, for instance, the epistocratic governance is a system where we put in place political power structures that will rest on highly educated citizens who are conscious of policies implementation with respect to approved procedures. So when this begins to happen, you find out that the solution we desire in governance will begin to be addressed, because people cannot come and play by the rules. If the law says build a road after violation, bill of engineering measurements and the rest have been established, to say this road will take 8,000 naira.
Comrade, do I have your attention? Let's look at resource mismanagement. It is known that oil has been our #1 source of income when it comes to the nation's resource. Nigeria, oil is actually our #1 source of revenue for the nation in Nigeria. And mismanagement of resources has actually been a significant problem when it comes to poverty mitigation in Nigeria. So how exactly has the mismanagement of oil revenues impacted the poverty rates in Nigeria?
Well, you talked about oil revenue mismanagement. Nigerians' heavy reliance on oil revenue has led to a very critical situation of mismanagement due to corruption, with billions of dollars lost to oil theft, corruption, an inefficient subsidy regime. Now, again, we've seen the adverse effect of this oil revenue mismanagement in terms of infrastructural deficits, which have to do with inadequate infrastructure, such as road, electricity, water supply, which now hinder economic growth. So now people are bothered to steal, they cut away the patrimony of Nigeria because the oil resources belong to nobody. It is not properly managed. If you find your way there, you take the much you can, and nothing happens afterwards. There are instances where ministers of oil in this country are being hounded because of how they have mismanaged their people, the resources of the oil. So the oil is a wasting asset. We have not used it judiciously to prepare ourselves for the doomsday. The doomsday are here already with us. Inflation is over the roof. The economy is on its feet. I mean, it's on its knee. The population is soaring. I mean, salaries are not being paid as at when due today. Not too many people are employed, such that the oil resources and revenue that would have been the so-called have been filtered away. So what we need to do basically is for Nigerians to own shares in the oil business. Government should not have business in business. The states of the federation should share shares in the oil investment in Nigeria, such that whatever comes to them be plowed into their own local economies. So we cannot continue in this scenario where government claims to be the owner of all the resources, only to take the revenue and to filter it away by government officials because of corrupt tendencies. So we have nothing or much to show, even if we had something to show for the oil. But as of today, we can only see what was done previously. We are not about to see new things being done with the oil resources. The Nigeria oil now has been used to mortgage for loans and debt. So the debt servicing ratio to earning in Nigeria is another matter. So whatever we earn from other sectors of the economy through taxes today are virtually being used to pay back debt in this country, as much as even the oil revenues are now being used as collateral for the backlog of debt. So there are issues, my dear. So the oil resources have been mismanaged. We don't have functional refineries in Nigeria as big as Nigeria is. Why should a liter of oil, for instance, sell for 1,000 naira in Nigeria? I'm a metallurgical materials engineer trained. I can tell you authoritatively that a liter of oil in Nigeria should not sell for more than 50 naira. But if anybody feels otherwise, I challenge the federal government of Nigeria to so make me the Minister of Oil Resources in Nigeria and give me 4 years as a metallurgical process engineer. A liter of oil will sell for 50 naira in Nigeria within 4 years. Eragbe Anselem has said this authoritatively. So the world can listen to me. I'm not just ranting. I'm saying the engineering of it, the economics of scale of it, and the technical process of it are within my fingertips. So this is why I began to talk about the system of governance that will take us out of the hood. Because we must have a situation where truly educated people with the know-how be allowed to lead Nigeria. And that system is called the epistocratic governance. So some have proposed it, but the idea of that system is such that our political power will rest on highly educated citizens. But this time around, citizens that are vast, whose track record does not show endemic corruption, whose inclination will be towards productivity optimization, putting to use the endowment of our country vis-a-vis the human population. So these are the solutions.
Comrade, just because of time, what role, we understand that the local government is the government at the low level, the government closer to the grassroots, the government close to the people. See, we are always talking about the federal level, at the federal state, what they are doing. But let's look at what the government at the grassroots is doing in order to, curb, reduce and mitigate the level of poverty in their different local government areas, in their different states. What role has the local government played so far, since they are closer to the people, in order to help with this poverty situation in Nigeria?
Well, thank you. Proximity to the people is not actually a basis to eradicate poverty in anywhere in the world. I talked about epistocratic governance, where some have proposed that the system is such that political power rests on highly educated citizens. Now, and by education, it's not necessarily the amount of certificate you have so acquired by studying, which is important also. It goes to show that first and foremost, you must be an enlightened mind. You must be well groomed on processes, on procedures, on administration, financial, economics, and the engineering of society. Now, Nigeria is such a place where people feel the local government is meant for people who have little or nothing to offer in terms of capacity. People have not built their capacity in academics, in leadership, in governance, in all of these things. So it should not be so. Because they are closest to the people, the local government should be able to harness its potentials. So you need a leadership that will have the know-how, that will look inwards and be able to take comparative economic advantage of its own endowment. For instance, all you have might just be arable land that is fertile. What is now required of that local government will be to mechanize such arable land under plant, animal husbandry and processes with economics of scale to sell its processed goods. That way, you are now going to engage the population of your locality productively, because it is by productivity optimization that revenues will be generated and accrued into the system. But if you rely on a system where we rely on handouts from Abuja through the monthly allocations to the states and the local government from federation accounts, my dear, till Christ will come, the policy of handout is not going to help. It has never helped, neither will it help. So what will help is, yes, the local government must now be tailored towards productivity and its optimization by engaging the numerous within their locality to ensure that we take advantage of comparative economic advantages in land, in minerals endowment, in services, in internally generated revenue, in management of our processes, and in curbing corruption. So these are the issues. So, and that is that part that talked about the epistocratic governance, where I began to say that political power should now begin to rest on highly educated people, not ignorant men and women who believe governance is
Comrade,
just
we
for the
have
purposes of
so far we have
aggrandizement.
just been talking about the government, the government, the government. Let's not forget that we, the people, have a huge part to play in this particular situation, and that brings me to how can the civil society, the media, and every other group actually help and contribute to improve the structure and well-being of citizens in the country in order to help with the level of poverty as well.
Well, the role of civil societies in NGOs, the CSOs, in any society is for advocacy. Now, their role is for advocacy. Now, advocacy is such that you create consciousness in the minds of the people and governance system such that you advocate on how things be done. Because advocacy involves supporting a cause or proposal, often through influencing public policy, resource allocation, or societal attitudes. So effective advocacy can lead to significant positive changes in various areas, such as human rights, just like we have seen, environmental protection, social justice, and some of this advocacy. So this is the role of civil society in Nigeria. But you know that in Nigeria, as much as this civil society keep on the advocacy, people in government are actually not ready to change. So change becomes an issue that is lacking in Nigeria. But of course, most of the key elements in advocacy will have to be with raising awareness. Under this, you will have to inform the public about issues or their causes. Of course, the NGOs and CSOs, they influence policy, working to change the laws, the regulations, the policies, and other framework of governance systems in such a way that this policy influence will impact positively on the people. Of course, advocacy builds support by gathering allies, supporters, stakeholders, and all of these persons who have a common interest to advocate and pursue that policy trust. Empowerment is another issue they do. For instance, our communities are empowered. Empowering communities, strengthening the capacity of affected communities to advocate for themselves. For instance, you've seen the farmers' elder crisis in Nigeria. You have seen the oil spillage crisis in Nigeria. You have seen the mineral exploitation. For instance, the tin mines, the Colobant mine in Jos. You find most of these abandoned sites, the environmental impact assessment. And areas you have things like a quarry that will affect the life of people through dust. You have silicosis, which causes health issues, long and sustained tuberculosis, and some of these issues. So the work of the CSOs and the NGOs are some of the issues I've listed. But there are different types of advocacy also. You have public advocacy, using media, campaigns, public events to raise awareness and build support. You have a policy advocacy, working with policymakers, government officials, legislators to influence a policy decision, like the National Assembly, State Assembly, and the rest. For instance, the issue of salary wages, minimum wage, so many other issues. These are policy advocacy trust. Of course, they engage in community advocacy for the empowerment of supporting communities to advocate for their own needs and rights. We have corporate advocacy, which they do also to influence businesses, corporations to adopt policies and practices that support social and environmental causes. So there are a lot of effects of advocacy strategies, like clearing messages, developing a clear, concise, and compelling message that resonates with the target audience. They build coalition as an effective advocacy strategy by collaborating with other organizations, groups, individuals to amplify advocacy efforts. Of course, they use data and evidence, grounding advocacy efforts in data, for instance, research, and evidence to build credibility and persuade the decision makers to ensure that these policy trusts are in line with what it should be. They engage stakeholders also by involving and empowering stakeholders, including unaffected communities and the rest of them, and to take an active role in advocacy. So, for the civil societies, you agree with me that some of the things I've listed are the things they do even in Nigeria, to the point where there are international donors and supporters of advocacy efforts in Nigeria. But there are a lot of challenges also and opportunities associated with advocacy. For instance, we have resistance and pushback. Advocacy effort may face resistance from opposing interests or stakeholders, as we have seen severally. Of course, they have limited resources as one of these challenges. So advocacy efforts often requires significant resources, including time, money, and expertise, which is the reason international donors and organization agencies support efforts across the world. Under a changing context, we have advocacy efforts that must adapt to changing social, economic, and political context. So what that means is, as the situation unfolds, for instance, Nigeria is going through security issues. There are a lot of NGOs that support advocacy to eradicate or mitigate the security challenges associated with Boko Haram insurgency, Niger Delta militancy, like the government had to step in at the time to negotiate so that the issue of the pipeline vandalism could be mitigated. And the militant generals were now called out of the creeks and given juicy positions within society so that they could be properly integrated to allow the economy, national economy, to flow. So, of course, the digital advocacy, like you are aware, the rise of digital technology has created new opportunities for advocacy, naturally including social media campaigns, online petitions, and digital activism. So the reason we are talking today is part of this opportunity, the digital advocacy. So the world can hear me now because you have created a platform to express, through me, finding solutions to some of the issues that have become very disturbing in Nigeria. So these are some of the points. So
of course, Comrade, the world is obviously hearing you, and we are doing our best already, and we just pray that it is being carried out as well. That's the most we can have on this conversation. Thank you so much, Comrade Anselem.
Thank you very much, Signature Television. It is my pleasure always. And I want to thank you for the opportunity, and to fellow Nigerians for listening. Hoping and believing that though we are in opposition in government in Nigeria, but that is not to say we don't support the government to succeed. But however, some of the issues I have listed, providing solutions, is to let the government know that more has to be done in terms of policy implementation. So it is one thing to write the policies, another thing to implement the policy. Until policies are duly implemented, then we're actually not doing anything. So I hope that the government is listening so that policies be duly implemented, then Nigeria can move forward progressively.
Of course, Comrade. Thank you so much once again.
Signature TV, news in your pocket.